Mark. I'm here to help you install Lifeproof flooring that is popular and can be purchased at Home Depot. These are some of the tools that I'm using. I have a table saw. You want to use the saw or a jigsaw whenever you're cutting the flooring pieces smaller or shorter than 8 inches. You can score and snap when they're longer than 8 inches. It's not a problem. Table saw is good for long cuts, but you could use your jigsaw for that too. I'm going to take you upstairs now. Well, before you start your flooring project, you're going to want to prepare the floor. I had a OSB subfloor, which is like a plywood. It's the most common building material used in new construction, which this is. If it's concrete, you can put thin set to fill hollows, but with OSB, you're technically not supposed to use thin set, but I did, and it works fantastic. So I wouldn't worry about using that. This is the thin set that I use, VersaBond from Home Depot. Spread it with a trowel like that, mix it in a 5-gallon bucket. I mixed it thin so that it would pour out of the bucket. A little bit runnier than you would normally, consistency that you would normally use. You're going to need a stick, a piece of wood that's very straight, and I used a 1x4 piece of primed pine, which is nice and straight, has a nice straight edge, and it's a little taller than me, and it's about 6 feet long. So this is a scraper, kind of an industrial scraper, super handy for scraping off any mud that's dripped onto the floor. It'll also, with OSB, it'll take off the top edge of any raised joints in the floor, which is important. You're also looking for gaps in the floor, and that's why I have the board. And if you look under the edge of this board, you'll see that that floor is pretty flat, so I didn't have to put any thin set in here. But if you find a 1/4 inch gap or more, I wouldn't bother with an 1/8 inch, but if you have a 1/4 inch gap under there, move this stick around in different directions across the floor and try and find where you'll discover where the hollows are, if there is a hollow. And take a piece of chalk and draw the perimeter of that hollow. I ended up with 3 fairly large, shallow areas in my subfloor because I think that when the contractors built the floor, the joists weren't crowned properly, and so some of them were maybe sagging a bit. So 3 areas, basically oval shapes that needed to be filled with thin set. And the thin set worked fantastic. It's set up in about 3 days. You got to give it a long time because it's designed for thin layers. And I had areas that were as much as 1/2 inch, maybe a 5/8 thick. And those took a while to dry. But once it dries, it's super hard, doesn't break up or crumble. Make sure you mix it super thoroughly though, so that the chemical reaction takes place and it's really well bonded to itself. Oh, and before you put any thin set down on the OSB, make sure that you paint or prime. I used just a water-based primer, and I primed that area inside the chalk line first, then put the thin set down. And then you'll want to run, use your trowel and trowel the thin set on. Once it's really evenly dispersed, take your stick and run it across the top of the thin set and move it around in kind of a motion like that. And that'll help spread your thin set out and get it to where it needs to go. Finish off the edge with your trowel, making it as smooth as possible. Then when it dries, come back with your scraper and take off any little imperfections on the top of the thin set. And then once you've swept and vacuumed, you're ready to go with your floor. So I'm going to show you the room layout a little bit. This is an apartment above a garage. And I want to show you the starter row. You always start on the longest wall, and you're going to go from the left side of the wall over to the right side of the wall. And so this is the seam. This is the first row, and you can see that I've got different size pieces of, you can use spacers, but I find that I just cut up a bunch of the paint sticks you get from Home Depot, and those work really well because they're solid. You need a solid backing, and since walls are never straight, I use shims in some places. Can you show the shim over here? So you use shim behind the where you have to have a bigger gap because you want your flooring to be dead straight. You'll notice it if it's not straight. And you should put these spacers in between where the boards meet so that the boards, when you press them back, are going to hit, both boards are going to hit that. You don't want your boards to get offset, especially the first and second row. You need to be really careful about that and make sure you fill all the spaces with a shim like this one over here. So this is a closet area, and I debated whether or not to use a transition in here. I really wanted to have no transitions, but it's impossible to do that in most cases with this vinyl plank flooring because you can only install it in one direction. You really can't go backwards, but you can get around that a little bit. If it's a small area like this closet, I just worked my way from in the big room and came back towards the closet, and then once I got in this area, I started in the closet and I measured from this back wall. I measured with a measuring tape from here back to where my larger floor is precisely, and was able to decide how thick this first piece needed to be to meet perfectly with the first part of the main floor. So I worked my way back up here, and then I was able to make this seam perfectly by adjusting the space at the back of the closet a little bit if I was off in my measurement. So you have a little flexibility. If it's a small area, you can move the flooring around to fit the rest of the floor, so you have a perfect seam here. So I didn't have to use a transition here, but I'll show you another area where I had to. So when transitioning from the big room into another big room like a bedroom, I wanted to change directions, but I would have rather just gone here without a transition, but you can see I put one in. And the reason I put one in is that there's no perfect way of bringing the flooring from this back wall over here. I couldn't bring the floor in. That's a lot of floor. When you come back this far and you're trying to match up with the rest of the room over here, you're not going to get it right. It's not going to be perfect. And it's going to be impossible to move this whole section of floor to fit perfectly here. Even if you were able to pry it, you have your weight on it. So I decided to use a transition, and they recommend using those. So I wanted to make a point. This is the vacuum, the shop vac I use, and it's important to vacuum the whole floor really well. But as you're going, go back and vacuum again. If you get anything in the seam of the pieces of flooring, it'll prevent a good fit. So I sweep them with a paintbrush. If I cut them on the saw, I'll sweep them all off, and I'll go over the seams again and the floor with the vacuum. So these are my pieces. We take them out of boxes, and we've put them in order of the patterns. There's only 4 patterns in Lifeproof, but within each of the patterns, they reverse the direction of the pattern. So you actually have 8 different pieces, and so you can plan out your layout by just taking whatever piece looks from an organized pile. So this is the piece I'm going to put in right now because it has the colors that I like next to these pieces. And when you're putting a piece in, I like to put it at about this angle, and this is where the instructions are a little bit lacking, and this is why I wanted to make this video. I wanted to be very careful and deliberate about how I show you to install these pieces because you'll learn a lot as you go. So I'm going to start at this angle. I'm pressing it in, kind of working it in a little bit, and then I'm going to slide it over till it hits the other piece, and then I'm going to try and work it in as I go down, and that's it. So if you come in close and look at the seam here, this is a pretty good small seam. If I had a big seam at one end or a big seam at both ends, that would tell me that the floor's not straight, that I've got something going on back here that's pushing the floor out. And so if you've got a nice straight seam and it's tight like that, you're good to go. The floor will lay flat. If your seam is too big, the floor will sit like this, and you can't tap it in really well if it's up like that. It should lay mostly flat if you've got a good start. So that's critical. The tools that you use to install this, there's a lot of people who use a piece of the flooring that's cut to tap the piece in, but I found that useless. This is the tapping block. The instructions say get one. Definitely recommend this.
I don't just hit the tapping block. I use a piece of plywood, if I can find it, right here. Just a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, because it doesn't break when you hit it. I put that in front of the tapping block and I use a regular hammer. And I'm going to tap that in, just a couple of taps and the seam disappears. I'm going to work it down. I always start from left to right. I'm going to go into the middle of the board and that seam disappears. And then I'm going to come down here and get the rest of that seam. And that's it. And then I'm going to take the rubber mallet, back up a little bit, and I'm going to hit it starting at the base. And work my way out until I can't feel that seam. And if I do feel that seam, sometimes it's still a little rough there. Turn your hitting block, tapping block over. Regular hammer. And go across the seam with it and hit it a few times until it's perfect. And that works really well for me. I always put my mallet where it needs to be for the next piece, and I put my tapping block hammer at the other end, and I'm going to go grab another piece. And I'm going to show you how to cut the ends. This is really straightforward, and most people know how to do this, but just so you have confidence in snapping these pieces, you put the last piece in reverse against the wall, and in the midpoint here, get it parallel. In the midpoint here, I'm just going to mark with a pencil where to cut. And it's roughly where you need a 1/4 inch gap here, so this is roughly a 1/4 inch, the tongue on the end of the board. And so I'm going to cut this one. The tool for cutting this, which should be handy at all times, is a utility knife and a square. And I'm just going to run my square up to the line. I'm not going to use any pressure on the first pass. First couple of passes, I'm just trying to establish a groove. And then with the third pass, I'm getting progressively stronger. Fourth pass is a good deep cut. Once you've got it cut, you're going to flip it over. Take note of where that is. Put your knee close to that. And then pull up. Have your knife handy to cut the backing. Sometimes the backing will tear on its own, and sometimes you have to cut it. So that's a piece ready to go in. And we'll show you one more install of a board. So get it lined up. And then run it back to the other board at that angle, working it in as it goes down. It should lay mostly flat like that. You want a nice small seam, so there is a small seam there. I'm going to take my tapping block. I use the big end. There's a graduated end, 2-step side and a 1-step side. I use the 1-step side. A lot of people complain about these breaking. They won't break if you keep your thumb and pressure on the block itself. If you let the block ride up and you hit it, it's going to tear this edge and the piece is useless. You'll have to take it out. Just a couple taps. If it takes more than that, reposition the piece. And again with the rubber mallet from this side out. That feels pretty good. If it didn't feel good, I would just hit it like that. One more note on the pattern. What you notice the most when you're looking at your floor is the butt joints, the end joints, like this. And they're really more noticeable if you have 2 different colors on that. So you really see that one, you really see this one. Those are the things you're trying to hide normally in flooring. And so if you want to hide those, the best thing to do is take pieces of flooring that have similar colors and join them lengthways so that the color variation going in that linear direction is less, and those will go away more. You often kind of get caught up trying to make pieces match patterns or alternate patterns going across with each row, but I think it's actually looks nicer if you take your dark pieces and you put a row of dark pieces, or at least 2 or 3 together, and then 2 or 3 together of the same light pattern in a row. It tends to look nicer. So that's something else I discovered. Hope that helps.